next up, and I don't know whether we're changing slides, but it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce a dear friend, Nick Robinson, who has agreed to come along and give us a few words on what it's like to be a patient. We know him and have seen him as was then the political editor for BBC, and we saw him outside number 10 Downing Street, night after night, making sense of everything that that happened. And he continues to do this, fortunately for many of us, in these very confusing times, when he is now on in the morning, as many of you will hear him, certainly very early this morning, on the Today programme, helping us make sense, again, of the world in which we live. Nick's voice is very much part of his persona, and so I think having him give his view to us will be really helpful. It's been a very, very public journey for Nick. And I was looking back in a couple of articles, and I think you said that, at times it goes, your voice, it goes to the heart of who you are. And the sheer tear-inducing frustration, of not being able to join the conversation in the normal way was very difficult. And so I'm exceptionally grateful that you've come along to speak out for many that can't, because we very much need to hear you and to hear that wonderful voice that you've got. So come on up, Nick. And I know Nick's going to take some questions afterwards. Come on up.
Aisling, thank you very much indeed. Aisling briefly almost had a voice like mine, or the one that I used to have a few days ago because of a result of a cold, which I thought she'd sort of come out in sort of empathy for my croaky voice. Turned out, as I say, it was merely a cold. I'm slightly unnerved, I have to say, to see these tweets, but that is because you're nice people. This is a kind of medical environment. You see, if that were my world, politics and journalism, believe me, you would not want to be live tweeting there. When I first revealed that I had cancer, I had a tweet from a Scottish nationalist. I'd had a bit of a run-in with the Scottish nationalists during the referendum that said, relieved to hear that Nick Robinson's got over his cancer. I'm relieved to hear that. He said, but I hope he now gets run over by a bin lorry. Nice. I had slightly more rewarding tweets at times when the voice wasn't working. Someone who suggested that I ought to work for one of those 0898 call lines. Looks for voices of recognition there from the men here. Seem to know what the 0898 voice. It has been, as Aisling said, a curious public journey. When I was thinking what to say to you here, what might be useful, I was reminded of a story that John Major used to tell about a meeting that he had with Boris Yeltsin. And Yeltsin was coming over as the Russian premier. And Major said to him, through a translator, of course, he said, look, Mr. Premier, I have heard of the terrible state of the Russian economy. He said, I've had the briefings, I've had the diplomats in, I've had the economists tell me all about it, but I really would like to hear briefly, in your own words, how you would summarise the state of the Russian economy. And Yeltsin listened to the translation and then decided to risk a word or two of English because he was not a confident English speaker. And he said, good. And then didn't say anything else. And the British Prime Minister said, well, look, when I said briefly, feel free to elucidate a little. And Yeltsin listened again, translation, then he went, not good, which clearly was an elucidation of sorts. And it seemed to me a very good parallel to use for this conference, because you may realise the not good reasons to have a conference like this at this time. We know that the health service is going through a period of extraordinary financial pressure. We know that morale is extraordinarily low amongst many of the staff who find it difficult to cope with that. We know there are real question marks about whether new treatments can be afforded and so on. And yet that is precisely, of course, why, to use the other half of the Major Yeltsin part of the equation, it is also exactly the good time, the right time, to have a conference like this, because it is precisely at that time finding ways to do more for less, finding ways to get more bang for your buck, finding ways to involve patients first is so critical to the future of the health service and for the patients that you're focusing on. Let me begin by saying, though, I am hardly your typical patient. On one level, I have been quite extraordinarily lucky. I was diagnosed as having, for those who are interested, a neuroendocrine tumour, which is at the nice end of cancer that you can get in the lung. And it's been surgically removed. And as far as I know, touch wood, cross fingers and so on, I have it no longer. Like any cancer patient, you have to be checked. I'm lucky for a second reason. I come from a family of doctors. My sister, my brother-in-law, my mother-in-law, all doctors, all people that I could get advice from, people that I could go to for help and support. And finally, of course, because I'm in the public eye, which no one can ever deny that being in the public eye means you get a little bit more attention, a little bit more support, a little bit more sympathy than many people who have the very lonely plight of living with illness on their own, feeling that there's nobody can help them. However, when I thought what I could talk to you about, I thought probably the most useful thing to do would be to think, what would I now wish I had known 2 years ago when I was first taken ill? What if I could transport the me now back to the me then? What would I say? And here are some of the things I thought might be useful for all of you to have some sense of. These are themes I will try and pursue. The first thing to say, and this may seem bleeding obvious, but it really wasn't to me, and I don't think it is to many patients. If you feel unwell, you know what? You're probably unwell. Go to see the damn doctor. I'll explain why I say that in a second. The second thing I'd say is you can't control illness. Not all patients are the same, but if you are someone like me, someone like I suspect most of you in the audience, expecting in your day-to-day life to have control of your life, believing that if you only read enough, if you only talk to enough people, if you only research enough, you'll be in control. The first thing to understand as a patient is you're not, ever. Your body is. You're not in control. Your doctors aren't in control. Nurses aren't in control. Again, probably obvious to you who are medical professionals, not at all obvious to me as a patient. However clever you are, you can't crack it. What I say to my children now when I talk to the experiences, what it taught me about life, if you like, because I'm endlessly being asked what it taught me about life, is you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to what happens to you. And that is a lesson I wish I had had earlier, because the main thing I think I had to learn is about uncertainty. I really did believe that if I saw the right person who had the right scan and the right bit of information, they would know, capital K, underlined in bold. They don't know. They know a huge amount, but they sure as hell don't know what will happen to you, that individual patient, with your particular set of circumstances, with your particular diagnosis, and all the many things that can go wrong, and go wrong they do. Let me start with my story then, if you like, in the hope that some of it is interesting and some of it is helpful. First of all, diagnosis. The main thing I think I learned about diagnosis is the value of a doctor who knows their patient. Because what happened to me in my case is that I had, as an asthmatic, coughed my way, sniffed my way, wheezed my way through, as I did every year, the party conference season. Sad man that I am. Most of my life I have stayed up too late at night in sweaty conditions going to party conferences, and felt a bit rough and kept going to the GP for more antibiotics and for maybe a review of my asthma treatment. The key lesson I learned there was when on the third such visit, and we are now talking 4 months of doing this, 4 months, it's the first thing I say, when you're unwell, you're unwell, was when my GP walked in front of me. I hadn't had an appointment with this GP once. I was always too busy to arrange to see my GP, always just wanted the appointment now. The GP walked past me and said, "You've been here before, haven't you?" So I said, "Yeah, don't worry about it, Adele, it's fine." He said, no, but how many times have you been here before? And I said, I couldn't actually remember. I said, 3, 4, 3 or 4. He said, what? And you've been on antibiotics each time? You've been... And at that stage, he turned to the receptionist, cancelled his next appointment, dragged me in. So the knowledge that a medical professional has of a particular patient, incredibly important, incredibly reassuring. He then sent me to see a consultant for an asthma review. And forgive me, I'm not trying to plug my book. You can probably get it for about a p second-hand. It is literally, I have to read this now to remind myself. But I wrote a diary of that year. And this is the story of when I went to see the consultant. What began as a routine review of my asthma treatment has turned into something rather different. My consultant's done all the usual stuff, listening to my chest, getting me to blow into a tube, asking me how I feel. We're almost done when I drop in the fact that I've lost weight. Actually, I've gone down a whole belt size. In fact, you know what, I remark to the elegantly dressed guy behind the desk, I've just treated myself to a slim-fit Paul Smith suit for the general election, which I tell him I didn't expect to get into. No, when he asks, I say, I haven't dieted. No, I'm not exercising any more than usual. I have just lost weight. In the short pause that follows, it feels as if a klaxon has gone off and red lights are flashing. I'm sending you for a scan, he says. Now. Now, I sent that account to him and said to my chest consultant, Mike Beckles, look, my memory's hazy, maybe I got it wrong. He said, that is precisely what happened. The klaxon went off. It is another reminder. If you lose weight, you're unwell, you are unwell. Now, what followed, therefore, was a series of scans, a biopsy that revealed indeed that I did have this neuroendocrine tumour. And the next thing I thought might be valuable to say to you is that I then did what I think a lot of patients do these days, go on the internet. Now, luckily, it is my job to process information at speed, to have some assessment of statistics, to have some understanding of risk. But the main thing I feel when I looked up for myself, it was almost always alarming and unnecessarily so. Because what do you do if you're a cancer patient? You go for death rates. You do. That's what you do. You go for survival rates. First thing you do. And quite quickly, because I was disciplined about it, I closed the page. I just said, I've no idea whether this applies to my particular circumstance, my particular condition, my particular prognosis and diagnosis. Shut the page. But one thing I would say to you all is that information is crude, it's simplistic, and that people are not trained to understand statistical measurements of risk. And more information is not something we can turn back on now, but there isn't nearly enough explanation for people of how to assess that information, how it applies to them, and what meaning it can have. Now, moving on then to treatment. I was lucky. I was lucky in a way that's very relevant to this conference. Just by chance, my chest consultant had done research and written a paper on how to treat, guess what, neuroendocrine tumours, the thing that I had, along with a lung surgeon at the Brompton and an oncologist at the Royal Free. Research made a difference to me. And it meant that they could instantly present me with a paper, 90% of which, frankly, I couldn't make head or tail of, but I had a sense that they knew what they were doing. I had a hope, based on the fact that this was scientifically based, and it was done on the basis of research and cooperation and understanding, that they knew what to do about my particular condition. But this is when, again, I repeat the message about uncertainty. The whole point of their approach to NETs was that you have swift surgery, you remove the tumour, you're back to work, 3 weeks' time. I found myself telling my sister this, the GP, my brother-in-law, the GP, and looking at their faces as they worked out whether to actually contradict me. My brother-in-law, who obviously was had less of a personal stake, said, even if you're right about the cancer, you do realise that having open lung surgery is the equivalent to being mugged on the street and repeatedly stabbed in the back. That in itself might take you 6 months to recover from properly, let alone the question marks about the cancer, whether you then need chemotherapy, whether what happened to me, which I'll talk about in a second, my voice, would happen as well. Again, the twin things that were important to me: understand uncertainty, grasp it. Now, my sister now says to me, I didn't contradict you because you needed to believe you were in control. You don't need to give everybody information up front. Some people like me, sad alpha males who want to get back to work straight away, need to feel they're in control. But getting people to understand uncertainty, giving them information they can understand, seem to me crucial things for people to do. I looked at the research again. And I am a pretty calm guy. I mean, I was I don't say this I say this just so you understand me. I was in a fatal car accident when I was 18. I've been in hospital quite a bit as a result of that. I'm not scared of hospitals. I'm not frightened of dying. I've sort of dealt with quite a lot of these things. And yet I found myself terrified by a statistic that told me I had a 1% mortality rate on the table for lung surgery. Again, unhelpful information. It took seconds for my surgeon to say to me, well, hold on, who do you think actually has lung surgery, he said to me. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, very sick people and very old people. So if you then do a percentage chance on the basis of relatively fit guys in their early 50s, that rate is transformed. But again, I'm surprised now to relate, and sorry if it's obvious, how much I believe the worst rather than believe the best at that stage. Now, I did have the surgery. And then, of course, what happened to me, or I say of course as if you would know, why should you? What happened to me is that the side effect was the one thing that we hadn't actually discussed. I'd discussed many possible side effects. The one side effect we hadn't thought of was this. This is a little note in my diary as I wake up in the high dependency unit having had surgery. The operation was, I'm told, a great success in removing the cancer. But, it also seems to have stopped my vocal cords working. I can barely speak above a whisper. My surgeon warned me that he might not be able to get every last bit of nasty cancerous stuff from the inaccessible bits of lung near my main airway and my critical artery. He was delighted to find that he could. It was, I gather, the surgical equivalent of removing a shelled, soft-boiled egg from an egg cup into which it's been glued, but without touching the inside of the egg cup. Some feat. Unfortunately, the nerve to a vocal cord has taken a bit of a battering in the process. I had prepared for everything, but not for this. I had no voice. I could talk a bit like that, was the level of my voice. Now, what, if anything, is useful for you, perhaps, to learn from that? A couple of things. The main thing is, and I've talked to them at length about this, so I say there's not even 1 ounce of resentment about it. The surgical team were nervy to talk to me about what happened. And nervy for reasons I quite understand now. Nervy about what I might conclude and what I might do, I think, in the circumstances. And it fell, and this is another little lesson I learned, to the Macmillan cancer nurse to be the person I could talk to. What's the lesson? The lesson for me is not just that Macmillan cancer nurses are tremendous, but also that almost anybody can be the person that will listen to you. And if they do, they can be of immense help. And I was able to say to this cancer nurse, I don't blame anybody for this. Surgery is not, I was about to say rocket science, but surgery, of course things go wrong in surgery and go right. I just need to know what happened. Just need more information than I'm getting at the moment. Can you make it clear to anybody you need, I said, I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to write a letter. God help me, I'm not going to sue. Not that I think I would have been in a position to even if I wanted to. I just need information. And this nurse did just that. My surgeon came in on his day off. We had 2 hours chatting, about 10 minutes on this and about an hour and 3/4 about other things. But that information, that security proved to be absolutely vital to me in the battle that I then had, which was a much more public battle, to get my voice back. One other theme then of my treatment. I then had chemotherapy. I'd been told that if I had surgery, I almost certainly would not need chemotherapy. No complaint again, but it was another lesson in uncertainty. I wish, frankly, people had said, we don't know. You might not. Because the more I had been aware of that, the less I would have made assumptions about what was going to happen to me next. At that stage, I found my doctors became more and more open about uncertainty, and I became more and more interested in the limits of medical knowledge by definition. And they said to me, we've no idea whether this chemotherapy will work for you. There's just not enough patients with your condition to know. But if it was us, we'd give it a go. So give it a go I did, knowing that I knew nothing much at all. And like many people who've had chemotherapy, it's not a lot of fun. I'll read you one other extract, and then I shouldn't take up too much of your time. I don't say this to distress anybody who's... Are there chemotherapy people going through chemotherapy at the moment? Anyway, there'll be some who have been or have got relatives, patients and others. Chemoland, it says here in my diary. I can't say I wasn't warned. What poisons the cancer will, of course, poison the rest of you, they said. You may feel nauseous, tired, have a metallic taste in your mouth. Yeah, right. Nothing prepared me for this. I feel as if every normal function of my body has been disrupted. Tasting, smelling, digesting, breathing are all unspeakably unpleasant. I could fight pain. I could focus on the enemy and defy it. Not this. My body is being taken over and I have no means of restoring control. The bloody irony of it all is I've been declared cancer-free. This is a mere precaution. It feels worse than having the disease, the surgery, and even losing my voice. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. Now, that was on one day. And the truth was, I discovered another thing I didn't know. You can change the chemotherapy cocktail you're on. And when I described that experience to my chemotherapy nurse, she said, sure, don't worry. We can take this drug, we'll give you another drug. I never felt that again. Chemo was no fun, it's completely copable with for the remaining 5 cycles. And what I have done with the many friends I now have who've had cancer, many of you will have followed Steve Hewlett's rather impressive battle in public with it. The Radio 4 presenter writes a column in The Observer. Please read it if you don't, because it's a good thing to read. Was the first thing I said to him is, chemotherapy, Steve, there's a cocktail. There are choices. There are options. Talk to people about what you're going through. Don't simply take for granted that that's what you need to put up with. So final messages maybe before we take 1 or 2 questions. Is that, as I say, I am a peculiar type of patient, but I think the internet age means there's probably a growing number of people like me who want information and want understanding. I think there is quite a long way to go in the world that you all occupy to translate that ridiculous surplus of information into information that is usable and comprehensible and reassuring to patients. All patients I've spoken to find the most helpful thing is to talk to other patients. They're the ones that know what chemotherapy is like. They're the ones that know how to build a relationship with a nurse or with a doctor. You can never, ever put patients first enough. And the very final thing I would say is this. What everybody you deal with can do is give you hope, give you self-belief. And what the cancer charities do is do that every day. They make us believe it can be better, that it might not be a cure for us, but it might stop someone else going through the same thing. It might not help our relative, but it might help somebody else's relatives. And I think back actually to an experience I had after that rather awful car crash I had when I was 18. And it was not about a piece of data, and it was not about a piece of medicine. It was just about raw humanity. I had been picked up off the road in a pretty bad state in France. And after a month in intensive care, I was flown home in a little air ambulance. And I will never forget the moment that the nurse got into the air ambulance when it had landed at Manchester Airport. And he said, I'm Jerry from Bury, and you're going to be okay. And that's what, ladies and gentlemen, patients need as much as you can tell them. Thank you very much.